We're in Istanbul for the TRT World Forum, where global power shifts are being redefined. I'm Yusuf Aram, and this special edition of Strait Talk looks at how the rise of the global south, new alliances, and emerging economies are reshaping the world order and challenging the dominance of the West. From Gaza to Tehran and Moscow to Beijing, the old world order is being tested like never before. The wars and realignments of the past 2 years have exposed deep cracks in U.S. influence and reshaped how power is exercised across the Middle East and beyond. Washington's dominance, once unquestioned, now faces new rivals and competing centers of gravity. As the balance leans towards a more multipolar world, America's alliances, including those in the Middle East, are under growing scrutiny. And while Washington still commands military and economic strength, its moral authority is increasingly in question. Here at the TRT World Forum, policymakers, academics, and analysts are debating how the world is changing. This year's theme, The Global Reset, examines how power is shifting away from institutions long dominated by the United States. But as Washington's global standing comes under new pressure, could its decades-old alliance with Israel now be testing America's credibility, both at home and abroad? For decades, U.S. public opinion has firmly been on Israel's side, but that may be changing. To unpack what's driving this shift and what it means for the Palestinian cause, I sat down with David Hearst, editor-in-chief of the Middle East Eye. We discussed the changing tide of public opinion in the United States, where support for Israel is facing unprecedented questioning. Thanks for joining me now. When we look at what's been happening in the region, over the past 2-3 years, I think we can have a pre-October 7th world, a post-October 7th world. And in this post-October 7th world, aside from the geopolitics, I think the narratives, the public opinion, there's been some huge changes. Talk about that. What changes have you seen?
Well, I think the most important change that we've seen as a direct result of Israel pulverizing Gaza, we've got to remember when we say pulverizing, they have dropped the equivalent of 5 nuclear bombs, at least 5 nuclear bombs, 100,000 tons of TNT on a tiny space, the most crowded concentration camp in history. And they haven't just pulverized Gaza and every single building in an attempt to commit a genocide and to force as many of those 2.3 million Palestinians into the sea. They pulverized their own image. They've pulverized the image of liberal Zionist Israel, the small Western player, the sort of John Wayne being surrounded by Apaches in Fort Apache. That is gone. Liberal Zionism cannot justify a defensive war because it's obviously not defensive anymore. It can't justify apartheid. It can't justify the attacks on the hospitals and the dismantling of society that Israel has attempted, not just the hospitals, but killing each of the surgeons and killing the government and literally dismantling a whole society. And it can't do that in the name of self-defense. And instead, the image of Israel has been replaced. Instead of John Wayne, it's a settler with a Bible in one hand and an M16 rifle in another. Instead of defending known borders, it is fundamentalist Zionists, religious Zionists, who think they're recapturing land that was dictated to them in the Bible, attacking defenseless Palestinians in the West Bank, because we're all forgetting what's going on in the West Bank while we think there is a ceasefire in Gaza, whatever the word ceasefire means. That's the other thing. We say there's a ceasefire, but in fact, Israel has not stopped launching attacks for almost every day since the Sharm el-Sheikh, so-called peace accord.
But this isn't the first time Gaza's attacked.
I mean, settlers have been encroaching upon Palestinian land for years. What's different this time around where we're seeing a much different global reaction?
Balance has tipped. There has been a fundamental shift in global opinion. Partly it's a generational thing. It is that suddenly, this is not a war that hasn't been covered. This is covered in granular detail by TRT, by MEE. We've lost 2 correspondents covering it in the NASA hospital. This is a war that is being played out, genocide that's being played out real time on everyone's iPhones, on 5G, 4G, everywhere. And this is the entry point into the conflict of a whole generation of Americans and British, and they are saying, everywhere, and they are saying, what's going on here? What are our governments doing about it? There's a fundamental change of world opinion. And I would regard that change of world opinion as equivalent to what happened to American opinion after the Tet Offensive. Now, the Tet Offensive in the Vietnam War was a military failure. Between a third and a half of the Viet Cong, by revealing themselves as fighters, were killed. And it didn't capture any territory. But what happened was that American public opinion changed irreversibly. Now, it took 7 years from the Tet Offensive to the end of the put-out for Americans to put out Saigon. But that's where it actually started. And I think the same thing is going to happen in Gaza. That now governments are not following suit. And you have fundamental problems in addressing the 21 points that a lot of governments, including Turkey and the state of Qatar, signed up to in Sharm el-Sheikh. One of them is disarming Hamas. I'm a veteran of the Northern Ireland conflict, which is where I started journalism. And it took 11 years to disarm the IRA. And enormous political carrots were given to change the whole paradigm, not just over Republican paramilitaries, but loyalist ones as well. And big concessions, big political concessions were being made to both sides by the British state. And you had America standing behind Britain. And that's all that had to happen before decommissioning. Now you've got a 21-point plan in which decommissioning has to start right from the beginning, even before there's any more troop withdrawal from Israel. Now, only other point I'd like to add is that no one talks about Palestinian public opinion. There's actually been a poll, a very good poll by Shikaki, the Palestinian pollster, who's no friend of Hamas at all, who says that 70% of Palestinian opinion in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, and in Gaza support the right of armed resistance. 70%. And 44%.
Is this higher after October 7th?
Absolutely.
So it's actually bumped up.
Absolutely. Okay. And you go to Jordan, it's higher still. Now, you know, there's a vacuum leadership at top of Fatah, because President Mahmoud Abbas has now said, if anything happens to me, it is El Sheikh who will take over. There's no talk about elections. He's trying to shift the deck chairs on the deck of the Titanic as the PA gradually goes down and drags everyone with it. There's a vital need for a resurgence of Palestinian leadership, and Palestinian public opinion says we actually want these guys to represent us. All right.
U.S. President Donald Trump, he calls himself Israel's best friend, but he's also been tough on Israel at times as well. It seems that he's trying to have a balance, but there is that huge Israeli influence in the U.S. government. This is undeniable. AIPAC, many donors, regardless, Democrat, Republican.
His son-in-law.
Exactly. And regardless, I mean, this is something that we've all come to accept as a reality. How do you rate Donald Trump's performance on this issue? Has he been able to operate with as much as he can within the spectrum that's allowed for a U.S. president? And also, how do you view his base on the Gaza issue?
Well, they are two very, very different questions. I think his base on the Gaza issue is crumbling, but I'll come back to that. I think his performance has been like his performance in a lot of other issues. It's reality TV based. It's the last person who talks to him. It's flip-flop. However, if you contrast his performance to Joe Biden's performance, it measures up, because Joe Biden totally failed to twist Netanyahu's arms and stop a major offensive. And Trump has achieved, at least periodically, a wind down, at least, to the offensive. Although, as I say, Israel keeps on bombing Gaza in much the same way as it does southern Lebanon. So in that sense, if it comes to BB sitting, as they say in the States, Trump has been an more effective babysitter of Netanyahu and more effective arm twister of Netanyahu than Biden has. I mean, Biden kept on saying, don't go into Rafah, don't do this, don't do that. But actually, by the way, here are the arms to do so. He did restrict a category of arms, but basically the Israeli offensive would have been impossible. It would have stopped after 2 or 3 months had Biden not continually resupplied Israel with the bombs that it was blasting Gaza with. So, and Trump, I think there are 7 separate ceasefire attempts, 2 of which actually started, which Biden allowed Netanyahu to sabotage. So if you compare Trump's quixotic character as the guy who gets things done, and everyone has to trot around, he's playing the emperor, and everyone at the vassal states. That's how he behaved in Sharm el Sheikh. He summoned Starmer, the British Prime Minister, to the podium and then cut him off. He just wanted.
That was very bizarre.
He just wanted the backdrop, like he covers himself with a backdrop of firefighters or miners. Well, this was a backdrop of prime ministers, and he just wanted them all to be props, visual props, and he did all the talking. That's how he behaves in these negotiations.
So getting to young Americans, has Israel lost young Americans, especially on the Republican side, which they've traditionally counted on?
Absolutely. And I think that's the real change we're talking about, because that will determine eventually the sort of politician and the sort of leader that will actually start treating Israel as it does every other country, and not say Israel is immune from behaving in a way because of its past or because of the past of the Jewish people. As someone who is a first generation Jew, who my parents were in Nazi Austria, in Vienna, as a first generation born in Britain. I totally reject the idea that Netanyahu somehow responds to the sort of massacres and chaos that my own family went through in Vienna. I totally reject that. And there are an increasing number of people all the way around the world that actually do that as well, particularly Jewish American opinion. And you can see that in what's happening with AIPAC. AIPAC is this huge lobby. It had the power once to anoint who was going to be politicians. Everyone had to go through the annual visit that AIPAC put on, and showing young Republicans and young Democrat politicians the lie of the land in Israel, basically grooming them, basically in what was happening. And if you didn't go on that visit, then you paid the consequences for it. I think an average of 33 new boys and new women who were in the House of Representatives went on that trip. I think the last number was about 11. They're losing their power.
Hmm.
And they're losing their power. In Britain, it would have been impossible to get up through the ranks of the Labour Party or the Conservative Party without declaring that you're a friend of Israel. Now that is no longer the case. So there will be a quite a long period between the change of public opinion that we've been talking about and the production of a new generation of politicians who thinks totally differently about Israel. But it will happen. And when that happens, Israel will find the umbilical cord with the West, which supplies it with sympathy, it supplies it with money, which supplies its which means that it can fashion politics and control politics not only in the Beltway but also in Britain and France, everywhere. That influence will go, and then with it, the arms will gradually go, and we'll find different ways of interacting with Israel, and then Israel will behave really quite differently. It is not capable of acting like a little Sparta, even though it claims to.
I want to talk a little about the media landscape. I mean, you have kind of like even a split in the media. You have the traditional media, which, I mean, there's a lot of blame saying, "Oh, Israel owns media." Let's not exaggerate, but we can say it is Israel friendly media. That's true. But then you have this new media, or a global South media, or an alternative media, whether it be podcasters or whether it be channels like TRT World, Al Jazeera, Press TV, CGTN, RT, or periodicals and websites and dailies like Middle East Eye, giving an alternative view, giving an, I don't want to call it an alternative truth, but another side of the story that traditional Western audiences hadn't seen before. How effective has that?
It's been hugely effective, far more effective than someone running one of these websites could possibly dream about. We've had an enormous response over social media, and our videos have gone literally everywhere. And we're a small organization. I'm still scratching my head as to actually what has happened, but it has propelled us into a prominence that I couldn't have thought possible 2 years ago. I think there's several factors involved in that. Firstly, the mainstream media started this whole 2 years on the wrong foot. It started it with the attack that Hamas made on Israel, and saw everything through that prism. And we didn't. We said that there was something going on in Gaza for 17 years of siege before October the 7th. And, there were columnists like me and others who were saying, if nothing happens, there'll be an explosion. We didn't know where and when the explosion would take place, but that was the explosion that we were talking about. So we had a totally different view of October the 7th. Of course, it was a terrorist attack. Of course, there were innocents. Of course, it was a shock to Israel. Was it Israel's 9/11? Was it fundamentally different from everything else that Israel had done to Gaza and was doing to Gaza ever since? And my answer would be no, it wasn't. It was on a different scale, and there are various theories as to how that happened. Was it the fact that Hamas and the other groups stumbled across they expected a much bigger resistance, Israeli army resistance, than actually happened, and then they ran out of targets, which were initially military ones, and stumbled across a music festival? Or was it designed from the start to sow havoc? And there are two different theories about that. But right from the word go, this was treated as, by the mainstream media, as Israel's 9/11, and therefore somehow Israel was given a huge amount of latitude by everyone to repeat the horrors of October the 7th practically every single day and every single week on the Palestinians afterwards. Although with the Palestinians it was different. The Israelis were murdered, according to the BBC and to the New York Times, but Palestinians died. Somehow the agency of the killings was involved. And a huge amount, when when Israel first struck with a missile in one of the hospitals, an awful lot of effort was put into saying, oh, no, this was a missile that misfired and that had been fired by Islamic Jihad, until that was proven to be wrong. So there's an inherent bias that somehow the attacks on the hospital, which came more and more pronounced, was somehow justified by an unknown and unseen Hamas command center deep below the ground, which never existed. And one myth upon another was claimed. The myth, for instance, that the Hamas fighters lined up babies and beheaded them in front of their parents, or the myth of mass rape, which was promulgated by the New York Times and then disowned by the parents of one of the poor things that had been raped. So, you know, it started from that point of view. Having said that, I think as people, as this war has gone on, and as they can see public opinion changing, and as there's been so much internal dissension in the BBC, but also in the New York Times, there's a whole group of contributors who are now boycotting the New York Times. The New York Times has changed its coverage. It is using the word genocide now. The Guardian's not, and the BBC is not. And there's a huge resistance, but you can feel that they're being dragged against their will, very much as they were in Iraq, which they supported at first, and then dragged against their will to find out that the invasion of Iraq was absolutely going nowhere. And so they're in a different place now to where they were before. And I think together, the media that we have and the mainstream media are sort of finding common ground. They are changing, but belatedly. Their record on Gaza has not been good. But I'm reading less and less stuff. There is still a huge omission, a sin of omission being created. So that, for instance, the ceasefire, they're still talking about ceasefire and how Hamas has broken that ceasefire. There's very, very little coverage of how many Palestinians have died since the ceasefire, and even less coverage about what's going on in the West Bank. But sporadically, certain things are getting through, and different forms of television are getting through more effectively. I think one can make we have a commentator who has been to the West Bank several times, Louis Theroux, but he's primarily in the entertainment business. He's not hard news, but he knows about the settlers. He did an extremely effective interview with a settler that shot through the image of Israel being somehow moderate or somehow on the defensive.
When you look at the current zeitgeist right now, and you look at the global conjecture, could you say that right now is the most opportune time to push forward for the recognition of a Palestinian state? Do you think that the stars have aligned where some type of unity and solidarity would get that pushed through, especially with record recognition now at the UNGA?
You've got to ask yourself what it means. What does recognition of a Palestinian state mean? If it means that Israeli war criminals are more likely to be tried in court under universal jurisdiction, yes, I'm in favor of that. If it actually means that you think that a Palestinian state is possible, or a two-state solution is possible, then it's another part of the myth-making that we've had ever since Oslo, because a Palestinian state is less possible now than any time before. There's nowhere to put it, for one reason. It's way beyond the 22% of Palestine that Yasser Arafat dealt with at Camp David. It's moved beyond, it's gone way past the right of return. If you looked at the last map for a Palestinian state that was produced the last time around in Trump's first presidency, it was, tiny bits, and ending up with a business park right on the Negev desert. It's nothing. and the settlers in the West Bank have now locked up all Palestinian villages, and literally, and are aiming at getting the maximum amount of land with a minimum amount of Palestinians on it. So the West Bank is absolutely being decimated. So if the recognition of Palestine is a mechanism for enforcing legal processes that should take place against individuals who took part in ethnic cleansing, all well and good. If you're seriously thinking that a Palestinian state will arise from this, then dream on.
David Hearst, Editor-in-Chief of Middle East Eye, thanks for taking time out and sitting down and talking with us. You've been watching a very special edition of Strait Talk from the sidelines of the TRT World Forum. I'm Yusuf Aram. Looking forward to seeing you again next episode.